Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Precious, and on this channel I share beginner friendly sewing tutorials and fashion related content. So all my returning subscribers, thanks for always stopping by, and to my new viewers, you're in the right spot. Whether you're seeking to brush up your sewing skills, you're in the right spot. Okay, so in today's video we're going to dive into one of the essentials of garment making, and that is how to cut a long and short basic sleeve for a basic garment. Okay, so if you've been having difficulty trying to draft your pattern for your basic sleeve, this video is going to simplify that for you. And more importantly, we're going to begin by taking the measurements for the long and short sleeve pattern. Okay, so I'm just going to be making use of this mannequin. So first things first, I'm going to be taking the armhole circumference. So I'm just going to be taking the circumference. So whatever you get when you take yours, you'll be seeing how this would be used when we begin drafting. All right, there's so many ways people draft their basic sleeve. If you choose to go by this method that I would show you, you may not really need to take this shoulder to bicep measurement. All right, but I just want to take it so that whatever method you chose to derive your shoulder to bicep measurement, that would be up to you. All right, so you take the shoulder to the bicep. So how do you know your shoulder to bicep? An easy way would just be like, you just flex your arm, okay, this way. You would see that there's a bulge. All right, you'd see that bulge at your upper arm area. All right, you can just go ahead and take that measurement from the arm up until that bulge at the upper arm. All right, to get your bicep. So whatever measurement you get, if you get 5, if you get 6, if you get 4.5, that would be according to your body. For a short sleeve, maybe you want your short sleeve to be around 7 inches or 8 inches or 9 inches, or whatever part you want your short sleeve to be. You can just determine that. Sorry, I don't know if you can see. I want to make sure you can see this. You just make sure you indicate that part where you want the sleeve to stop at. All right, then wherever you want the sleeve to stop at, you want to take the circumference around that area. All right, as I always do when I'm taking body measurement, I always tell you, you put your finger, one of your finger, in between, so that it is not too snug and it is not too loose. All right, now for the long sleeve part, you would place this at the shoulder, and you would take it up until the elbow. All right, you want to take your elbow measurement. You could choose to put it this way, maybe from here to the shoulder, but we as humans, we always flex. Okay, and if the fabric doesn't really have stretch to it, it may kind of make it difficult to flex your arm. Okay, so I like to give it a little bit of slant up until the elbow. All right, I just like to give it a little bit of slant so that there would be a little bit of flexibility or ease around that area. Okay, around that area. You can see that when I placed it from my shoulder to the elbow at this side, I got 12 inches, but if I slant it a little bit, I would get around 12.75 inches. I'm going to have an extra bit of inch. Since this is a long sleeve, we're going to proceed and take this measurement, all right, to the length of the sleeve, the full length of the sleeve. Okay, the full length of the sleeve. So whatever length you want your sleeve to be, if you want it to be 22 inches, 23 inches, 24 inches, depending on how long your arm is, you just take it. So look at the way I placed it. All right, the top of the shoulder, took it this way. All right, and finally I'm taking it to the wrist. You can see that. I'm also going to be taking the wrist circumference. All right, so I just place it around this to get the wrist. Now if you're dealing with a fabric that stretches, you could just take your wrist circumference like this. Maybe the only ease you will just give will be when you put a finger right through the tape. But if you're working with a very tough fabric that doesn't stretch, I wouldn't recommend you taking your wrist measurement this way. I would tell you to just be flexible with this tape. Okay, pretending to bring the tape out of your wrist, because at the end of the day you would either try to wear the garment, or you may try to take off the garment. Okay, you don't want to be stuck. Taking the measurement, you see I got around 9 inches as my wrist circumference, but you would see that if I had taken it this way, just trying to make it snug, okay, what I would get would be around 7 inches. You can see 7 inches. You can see that we had 2 inches difference. So that would be all the measurements required to draft our basic sleeve. So we're going to head into the drafting of the basic sleeve. This is way easy. So without further ado, let's get right in. We begin by drafting the short sleeve pattern of a basic sleeve, and I've placed my pattern paper on fold. I have also ruled a line at the top there which represents my starting line. At this point, I believe you should have taken the circumference of your armhole, just like the picture you see above, or your armhole round as some people would call it. So when I took mine was 17 inches, as you can see, and I'm going to be adding 2 inches allowance. You know, I always like adding 2 inches allowance, but you can add whatever allowance you want to add to that. So if I add 2 inches allowance, that gives me 19 inches. So now I'm going to divide the 19 inches into 2. So I just placed one end of the tape on the 19 inches, and I got the mid part, which is 9.75 inches, as you can see there. So now I'm also going to divide this 9.75 inches into 2 again, and I just placed one end of the tape on the 9.75 inches to get the mid part, and that gave me 4 7/8 inches. So I'm going to be creating a straight line connecting both points together with the help of my ruler. This line would be the bicep line. This is assumed to be the widest part of your upper arm. If we're to use another method to get the bicep line, you can use the measurement we got when we measured the top of the shoulder to the bicep area, just like you saw at the beginning of the video. However, I chose to use the simpler method to determine my bicep line. So going forward, we are going to be dividing the 19 inches, which represents our new armhole round, by 2 by placing one end of the tape on top of the other, and we're going to be placing that 9.5 inches at the sharp angle at the starting line, and we're going to just be measuring where that 9.5 inches ends on the bicep line. I marked that there, and now we're going to be ruling a slant line from the starting line up until that point. At this stage, we'll be determining the midpoint of the diagonal line. I'm just going to place one end of the tape on top of the 9.5 inches there. This is just an easier way of getting the midpoint. If you want to use your calculator, you can use that. That will give you around 4 7/8 inches. So I'm just going to mark the midpoint there. At one part of the divide on the diagonal line, I'm going to be getting the mid part of that section. Okay, so this is how I place my tape, and I'm just going to mark the mid section there. At the other side of the divide, I'm also going to be getting the mid section of that area, and I'm going to mark that there. I'll just give labels to the pattern so you recognize that this is the bicep line. And from this point, we'll proceed to create the cap of the sleeve. From the mid part of the first divide, we're going to be coming up from that line by 0.5 inch. At the other part of the divide, we're going to be coming down from the midpoint by 0.5 inch as well. So we'll be making a curve by connecting point A to point B to point C to point D and all the way. So basically what we're doing is we are going to connect from here to here to here and finally there. Okay, just imagine you're creating a kind of letter S that is not too curved. All right, so I'll be making use of my curved ruler, and just look at the angle I'm going to place this. I want this to have a curve but not too curvy. I don't want it to be too deep. For the other part of the divide, I'll flip the curve to the opposite direction, and I'm going to create another curve in similar fashion. So we're going to determine how long we want our sleeve to be. This is actually a short sleeve pattern, so I want my sleeve to be around 7.5 inches. So from the starting line, I'm going to place my tape there and I'm going to go down and measure 7.5 inches. I'm going to mark that on one part of the pattern paper and also at the other part of the pattern paper. Then I am going to connect both points by rolling a line. Now the circumference around my arm, that is where the short sleeve ends, is 11 inches. So I'm going to divide this into two. That will give me about 5.5 inches, and I'm going to mark that on this line. I would also be adding 2 inches allowance to this, and finally I'll be connecting the point from the bicep line up to the point at the sleeve with a ruler. And this would be the hem of the sleeve. All what we just drafted now is the front section of the cap of the sleeve. We'll proceed to draft the back section of the cap of the sleeve. Okay, let me just explain something, right? You may choose to use the pattern this way and you may not record maybe a huge problem. Some people choose to use it this way. However, the front section of the cap of the sleeve is actually different from the back section of the cap of the sleeve. All right, the front section is actually deeper than the back section. Okay, and one may ask, why do I have to draft the back section separately and the front section separately? This is because the arm usually moves forward more often than backward. Okay, and this area of the arm needs ease, needs a lot of fabric to accommodate this frequent movement of the arm. All right, and that is why we make this adjustments to the cap of the sleeve so that it accommodates those frequent movements. Also, if you remember our basic bodice pattern, the armhole area at the front is actually deeper than that of the back. All right, so now we have to factor that in. Okay, so we have to create room for that dip we give to the armhole now by also shaping up the cap of the sleeve this way. So that is the variation we have from the front cap of the sleeve and the back cap of the sleeve. So we'll just proceed and I'll show you the differences. It's not difficult, very easy. So let's proceed to drafting the back sleeve. At this midsection here, I'm going to come up by 0.25 inch and I'm going to mark that there. And at the midsection of the lower slant, I'm going to come down by 0.25 inch as well. And now I'll be creating a curve starting from this line. It's going to touch the 0.5 inch mark there, and then it's going to transition into that point at the midsection. Okay, then from there it's also going to transition and flow downwards. Okay, so this is going to be like an S, but not really a deeper S. So I'm just going to be making use of this curved ruler, so you can just watch the way I'm going to make this curve. Then I'll flip the curved ruler in the opposite direction and continue the curve. And as you can see, we've drafted our basic short sleeve pattern. Now this line you see first represents the back part of the sleeve, and the line that comes inwards, the second line that comes inwards here, would represent the front part of the sleeve. So I'll go ahead and add 0.75 inch to the bottom of the pattern. This would be used for turning in the sleeve, or perhaps I may just use it as my stitching allowance. So I'm going to mark those points, and I'm going to be connecting both points with a ruler. I'll be cutting out the pattern now. Just watch carefully how I cut it. When cutting the cap of the sleeve, ensure you cut the back part of the cap sleeve first. Okay, just watch how I would cut it. I would cut the back part of the cap of the sleeve first, and after I'm done, I would spread the pattern open and I'm going to cut out the front part of the cap of the sleeve. And when spread out this way, you can see that the front part of the cap of the sleeve has a deeper curve than the back. And now if you measure the entire cap of the sleeve, you should get your armhole circumference plus the inches you added. So this is me just taking the measurement, and at the end of the day I got 19 inches. So now let's dive right into the long sleeve pattern. As you can see, I've rolled out my starting line, and we're basically doing what we did to the short sleeve pattern. The only difference is that this is going to be a long sleeve pattern. So first things first, I'll be dividing the sum of my armhole circumference and my 2 inches allowance by 2, and I'll further divide what I have into 2 again. Simply put, I'm dividing my armhole circumference plus my 2 inches allowance, which makes 19 inches, by 4, which gives me 4 and 7/8 inches. And I'm going to mark that on both sides and rule a line. Now, placing the tape at the starting line, I'm going to measure down to my elbow at 13 inches. I'm going to mark that on both sides of the pattern paper, and I'm going to roll a line. This line here represents the elbow. And finally, we're going to place the tape at the starting line, and we're going to measure down to the wrist, which would be the end of the long sleeve, and we're going to indicate that there. And this line, as you see, represents the wrist. We're going to check where 9.5 inches falls on the bicep line, and from there we're going to be rolling a diagonal line just like we did when we're drafting the short sleeve pattern. We'll be dividing this diagonal line into 2, and we'll further divide both halves into 2 again. So at the first quarter, we're going to come up by 0.5 inch, and at the last quarter, we're going to go below by 0.5 inch. Now we'll be using our curved ruler to create a curve that runs from the starting line to the 0.5 inch rise to the midsection to the 0.5 inch deep and down to the end of the diagonal line. Now this would be the front part of the sleeve. For the back part of the sleeve, I'm going to be placing my tape at the midsection, and I'm going to mark 0.25 inch there. Now I'm going to also go to the last quarter, and I'm going to come down by 0.25 inch as well. I will be creating a curve that starts from the starting line and touches the 0.5 peak up to the 0.25 peak at the midsection to the 0.25 deep up to the end of the diagonal line. The inward curve, as you can see, would be the front part of the sleeve, while the outer curve would be the back part of the sleeve. We'll come to the elbow line and we'll divide the circumference around that area into 2, and would mark that there, and would also be adding our 2 inches allowance. Now to the wrist, we'll be dividing the circumference around the wrist into 2, and we'll be adding 2 inches allowance to that. And I'll be joining all the points together with my ruler. This is how the sleeve looks like. I'll be cutting out the pattern. I'll cut out the back pattern of the sleeve first, and later on I'll be cutting out the front part of the sleeve. As you can see, I have cut out the entire pattern of the sleeve, and I would open this up so I can cut out the front part of the cap of the sleeve. And this is how you draft a basic long and short sleeve pattern. Please, if this video was helpful, give it a like. Feel free to ask questions. If you're yet to subscribe to the channel, please do well to subscribe to the channel and share this video to whoever may need it. And with this, we've come to the end of the video. Till I see you in the next video. Bye for now.